Cast iron versus carbon steel, which one actually deserves a spot in your kitchen? We're gonna do a couple little tests to show you why, and then we're just gonna talk about the pros and cons. And then hopefully by the end of this, you guys are gonna have a much better understanding which one's gonna work for you in which situations in the kitchen. So what are these actually made out of? Two things. One is iron, the other one is carbon. So which one has a higher carbon content? Cast iron or carbon steel? You're wrong, cast iron. Typically cast iron is gonna be 2% or more of carbon, whereas carbon steel is gonna be about 1% carbon. So as far as the chemical makeup of these guys go, obviously there's some aesthetic differences, there's some different thicknesses going on. So if you guys can see like the actual physical differences, so much thinner than a cast iron, much lighter than a cast iron, whereas these guys, super heavy walls, very thick, very heavy. Cast iron is poured, it's cast, right? So that you have these big molds, they pour in the iron alloy, whereas carbon steel is stamped. Essentially what they do is they'll punch out the exact shape that they need, they'll stamp it with a big machine. Typically the handles are riveted, as opposed to cast iron is gonna have one solid handle all the way through. These pick up a little bit more oil, you can kind of see, and it kind of just gets that polymerized look on it. So we're gonna do a side-by-side comparison of heat retention and responsiveness. We're gonna pour the same amount of oil in each pan here, and then see which one comes up to temp faster, see which one drops temp faster. So let's get into it. So the carbon steel came up to heat much faster. They started out about the same, but then the carbon steel just absolutely took off once I got to about 250 degrees. Boom. This is kind of crazy. After a couple minutes, I'm 15 degrees. And then in the carbon steel, a couple minutes, 35 degrees. So this guy's dropping like a rock. Big thing to note, because this one is cast and molded and this one is stamped, the riveted handle, that is one thing that's quite a bit different, especially if you're gonna use these at, at your restaurant and you're using these as, kind of your basic daily driver saute pans. They're riveted, so the handles are gonna stay much cooler as opposed to this guy, but you're not necessarily gonna be moving this around. You're not gonna be sauteing in this kind of guy. So yeah, so just a couple minutes, you guys can see, both of them have dropped about 50 degrees. This one's dropped about 60 degrees. And they're just gonna continue to do the same. These are about the same exact amount of oil. There's about a pint of oil in each one. So yeah, you guys can clearly see the difference. Much more responsive as far as heat goes. I use French tops at work. So putting these on my French top, this is gonna get extremely hot, extremely fast. It's also gonna get super cold, super fast. So if you're doing, any sort of sauteing or something like that, much better. If you're gonna use this, searing, like I said, I use this and, we'll kind of set this off to the corner and, a slightly cooler spot of the French top. Once it gets up to temp, it's just gonna hold that temp throughout service. You can drop an 8-ounce steak in this one and it's not gonna fluctuate whatsoever. An 8-ounce steak in this one's gonna cool that pan down so much faster. Maybe not the best for searing or any sort of proteins, fish, sure, maybe. If it's a much skinnier portion, lighter portion, something like that, you're not gonna have as much responsive heat. But this guy, as far as proteins go, as far as steak goes, pork goes, chicken, anything like that, I'm gonna go with cast iron all day. We've had some questions about, do either of these pans leach iron into the food? Simple answer is yes. The biggest things being acidic foods. So chemically, the way that these guys react, basically the acid in any sort of your foods, if you're gonna do any sort of like, typically tomato sauces or anything that's like lemon-based sauces, something like that, it's gonna strip your seasoning. You're gonna get some iron leaching into the food. That's just the fact of the matter. That's the nature of the beast. That's what they both do because they're both made of iron. But there's been multiple studies across multiple health boards, National Institute of Health, there's quite a few more, but it's not necessarily harmful whatsoever. For some people, it can definitely be beneficial. If you're anemic or you have any sort of issues with low iron or something like that, in fact, it is actually beneficial to cook in the cast irons. If you have an abundance of iron in your blood, which some people do, don't cook in them. For the most part, carbon steel is going to be a much faster cook, much quicker saute, so you're not necessarily going to get as much iron into your food, leaching into your food. Whereas cast iron, you're going to get a little bit more of that. Typically, you're going to do a little bit longer cooking. So I'll show you guys the difference. If you look very, very close, you can kind of see how much smoother this carbon steel pan is rather than this cast iron. You can see it's much bumpier. It's got a much more porous surface in it. That's why it's so important to create that seasoning layer, if you will. So typically what that is because cast iron is so much more porous, you're going to create this, kind of layer of oil that's going to actually kind of polymerize in the pan itself. It's going to create sort of that like non-stick surface that you see. Whereas carbon steel, it's got a much smoother surface, so it's a little bit easier to attain that seasoning level. But that being said, it's a lot easier to strip that seasoning level as well. That brings us to maintenance. Typically when you have this pan, what we do is I'll just go ahead and dump that excess oil and then take a rag. And you can see, again, super shiny, non-stick surface. And we'll just take this pan and throw it right back onto the French top. This guy, same thing. Give it a quick wipe. Back on the burner, good to go. A little bit of oil, a little bit of fat, it'll go a long way. I mean, for something like this large, I'll typically use just, a tablespoon of oil or something like that, and it'll coat the entire pan. Kind of top and bottom, just because your cooking surface is the one that's exposed all the time doesn't mean that the bottom can't rust too. If you do have anything that's like cooked on there or stuck or anything like that, if you screw something up, the pan's too cold, you throw in a protein, piece of fish or something like that and it sticks. Usually what we do is we'll pour a little bit of salt in it and then go ahead and use that salt in a towel as an abrasive. It gets rid of everything in the pan. Once you get everything out, all the salt out and everything, like I said, tablespoon of oil, give it a quick wipe, straight back onto the burner. Cast iron's gonna hold heat a lot better. The retention is, infinitely better compared to carbon steel. I'm gonna say that this guy's more versatile as well, just because, as I was explaining, you can definitely saute. We typically use carbon steel for sautes in the restaurant and a lot quicker cooking, but you can absolutely still do it in the cast iron. There's no reason that you can't. The downside to cast iron is it's so much heavier. I mean, it's incredibly heavy compared to its cousin, the carbon steel pan. Anything that you're gonna be doing quick cooking, something like that, carbon steel all day long. If you want any sort of like baking, durability, protein cookery, anything like that, I'm gonna go with cast iron all day. I'm gonna say that both of them deserve a spot in the kitchen. Like I said, we use both of them. I have French tops, so personally, I hate those little, the 10, 12-inch aluminum pans. They bend and they warp. They don't really stand up to prolonged high heat cooking. We use these every single day at the restaurant, 1,000 times. We use them for prep. We use them for service and everything in between. The biggest thing is just maneuverability with these and durability, heat retention with the cast iron. Oh man, this is my grandma's, so I got a lot of work to do on this one. Make her proud.